Salut les Belgos et les Belgos. My name is Brian, I'm from New York, and I've lived in France for more than 2 years now. Unsurprisingly, I like my life here way more than I do in the US, but living here has also shown me just how American I am in many ways. I always thought of myself as a blank canvas that could just fit in anywhere without a problem, but with time, I've come to accept that there are some things here that I'll just never be able to adapt to. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. Number 1. French people are instilled with the idea that everything either has to be or is complex. And I don't blame them for this because it comes from many things that are just fundamental to their way of living. Like, even the French language itself was literally designed to be as complicated as possible. Back in the 1600s, when the French Academy was set up to standardize the French language, instead of simplifying it, they chose to keep traditional spelling, and they made a whole bunch of exceptions to each rule that only the elites who had the time and money for formal education could learn how to use French properly. Here's a quote from a member of the French Academy that flat out admits that they did all this just so they could distinguish between the literate elites and the uneducated, ignorant common people. Oh, and women, of course. When the language you use is valued for how complex it can be, I can kind of see how it conditions people to perceive simplicity as something that's wrong or inferior. Another reason French people tend to see everything as complex is the general lack of guidance you get, especially in the sink or swim environment that you get thrown into right after high school. Once you reach university, there's far less support from the faculty and the administration compared to the US. Most professors don't have office hours, they're not accessible after class, they just come in, they lecture for 3 hours, there's no syllabus, so it's on you to take notes and figure everything out yourself. On the administrative side, important information can be very hard to find sometimes. And when that happens, you're on your own to track down the right person in the right department to help you out. It's the same thing when you get a job as well. Because French managers, they tend to take a step back and leave you to figure things out yourself. In general, you never really have a full picture on how things work. So that lack of guidance and reassurance just makes even the smallest things feel complicated. On top of that, as someone who's worked in both the US and France, the pay stubs that I get in France just look way more confusing than the ones I get in the US. All this does is just reinforce the idea that important things need to be complicated. In French schools, students are trained to be as meticulous and as nuanced as possible, especially when it comes to writing essays or dissertations on any topic. But the funny thing is, this approach doesn't really carry over that well into real life, because in real life, a lot of things are way simpler than they seem. Investing is a very good example of this, because most French people tend to associate a very high level of risk to investing in stocks, just because they automatically perceive anything that they're unfamiliar with as complex. It seems so complex that it just overwhelms them and pushes them away from ever considering the idea, despite how simple long-term investing in stocks can actually be. On the other hand, the majority of Americans invest in the S&P 500, and we simply see it as a basic and mostly risk-free way of safeguarding our retirements, and it's not something that we ever second guess. Complexity is woven into so many aspects of daily life here in France, and it just gets so frustrating for me because I've seen time and time again how it discourages people from taking action in many areas of their lives where it counts. Sometimes I just wish that French people can see things as simply as we do in North America. Like, we have acronyms like KISS, which stands for Keep It Simple Stupid, and we also say stuff like keep it short, sweet, and simple. And that mindset or that approach just doesn't exist at all in France. Number 2, everything feels too standardized here. Like, there's definitely a huge tendency to do things one specific way here. Emails and cover letters are prime examples of this. Like, there's this rigid structure that you're expected to follow, with all these set phrases that you have to include, like, Je me permets de vous contacter. Je reste à votre disposition pour toute information complémentaire. And my favorite, just because it's so extra, Je vous prie d'agréer. Madame, Monsieur, mes salutations les plus distinguées. It all sounds very elegant, but most of the time, I just want to send a very simple message. Instead, I'm just sitting there for 5 minutes wondering if I use the right formula and the right words just so I don't sound rude. Standardization also shows up a lot in French media, and it's the same reason why I can't bring myself to watch anything that's dubbed in French. All of the characters pretty much sound identical. They all have the same accent, the same rhythm, the same cadence, the same type of voice, and it's all delivered in written French with every syllable perfectly pronounced. It just sounds so unnatural to me because that's just not how French people speak in real life at all. One time I made the mistake of buying tickets to the French version of a movie, and after that experience, it's something that I make sure will never happen again. I think this obsession with standardization goes back to how centralized France is. Paris basically acts as the central authority that sets the rules for the rest of the country. And again, you have the French Academy that literally regulates the entire language. They decide which words get to be in the French dictionary, what gender those words take, how punctuation and grammar should be used, etc., etc. Because of how much Parisian institutions have imposed their authority on the rest of the country, a lot of regional languages like Breton and Occitan are nearly extinct. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, kids who spoke any language other than French in school got it beaten out of them by their teachers because the government wanted everyone to only speak French. And before all of this, you had the Catholic Church, which held enormous power and influence in France. So if you look at the bigger picture, French people have been conditioned to look to authority for the right way to do things over many, many generations. Having said all of that, doing things one way can be a very good thing when it comes to food here. There are so many things that I've learned from French food culture that I'll never let go of. Stuff like only drinking coffee after a meal, doing an apéro before dinner, always having bread on hand to finish off the sauce and any juices left on the plate. Like, I was never really a big fan of bread before I moved to France, but now, you'll see me carrying a baguette home with me at least twice a week. And I hate how cliche that sounds. Structure is something that can be both good or bad depending on the context, but in general, I just feel like the American way of doing things is more efficient, and it definitely allows for more liberty of expression. Number 3, being loud. Americans have a reputation for being very loud in Europe, which is something that's considered especially rude here in France. Politeness is a very important thing here, so most French people are brought up to be discreet and to keep their voices down in public. And it's almost the exact opposite in the US, where we're encouraged by everyone around us to be as confident as we can, and that translates into speaking with a louder voice. We definitely don't mean to be obnoxious or impose on other people, but it's also just the way our language works. American English uses way more chest voice compared to French, which comes more from the front of the mouth and has a lot of nasal vowels. So our voices just naturally project more. Since I mentioned French dubbing before, this is also the reason why French voice actors struggle so much when it comes to any scene that involves screaming or yelling. I've lost count of how many times I've started talking in a restaurant, only for people around the room to turn their heads and look at me, and then my friends just shush me for being too loud. And I'm like, I swear I'm not even yelling. That's just my normal voice. On top of that, cafes, bars, and restaurants in the US turn the music up way louder than they do in Europe. And people around us talk loud too. So Americans in general are basically trained to talk over everything. I am getting better at catching myself though. I'll typically hear how loud I am after maybe 2 or 3 sentences, and then I'll adjust. I say all of this, but in the end, it's all relative. Americans are very loud, but we're still quieter than the Spanish and people from most Arab countries, for example. And French people themselves would probably still be considered loud in Taiwan and Japan. Anyways, if you're watching this, you're probably French, so I just want to put this out there. If you ever get annoyed by some loud Americans next time, just ask them to tone it down. Most of us are very friendly, and we won't take it that seriously, I promise you. I'm pretty sure that approach is better than resenting us and complaining about us on the internet. And there you have it, a list of 3 things that I'll always struggle with in France. I know that this might just come across as me complaining, but I promise you that that's not what I set out to do at all. Literally, my entire channel is dedicated to positive content about Europe, and especially France. But I just think it's realistic sometimes to just remind people out there that moving to another country is not always going to be sunshine and rainbows. Every country has its own unique set of challenges for you to deal with. Pretty much everything I had to say in this video comes from my American mindset, but there's also the Asian side of my experience, which is very different, and I actually have a lot more to say on that topic. I am planning to make a video on that soon though, so stay tuned for that. Alright, that's all I have for you guys today. Please let me know in the comments below what you think about everything I said. I know that this video was a bit quirky, but I did try my best to make it all make sense, and hopefully that's the case. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I guess I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye now.